I know that even a lot of experienced agents find themselves in a little bit of a conundrum with these things. Buyer's agency, when you meet with buyers, do you discuss it right then, right there? How do you go about it? Because what most agents will say is that, well, I talked to them and they don't want to sign it, right? That's usually, and so is that a lack of just the agent either A, not being able to explain this to them? Do they just show it to them and say, here, read this and sign this? And
Well, I usually go over it pretty extensively, but with the other disclosure that we have in Virginia, they can sign that if we have to start with, because they're very tentative a lot of times. So, I mean, it's easier if somebody's recommended to you, it's through your sphere of influence or something, because they may implicitly trust you, but not always. And I think you have to explain to them that the buyer agency agreement protects both of us, and that is the way you work, that your time is valuable, you have other clients, and they have to understand that you're busy, and if you're going to commit to doing everything you can to help them, be constantly looking for properties, be available to show the properties, and that sort of thing, then you'd like that kind of same return trust. So that's what the buyer agency agreement does. And I usually fill it out and give it to them, and sometimes if they don't want to sign it right then, I'll say, okay, we'll bring it with you next time. But I always have another one because they don't bring it with them sometimes. Because I'm not going to continue to show them houses if they don't sign one.
I am the worst about this just because it took me a long time to get into any sort of habit because I didn't used to ever do them. I put it off on the state and just say that this is a law that we are now required to abide by. And so that way they don't feel like because no matter how wonderful you put it, sometimes people still feel forced into an agreement. So I put it off on the state and just say, you know what, I didn't even used to use these before either, but now, the state does require it so you fully understand your representation. And I have found that sometimes that's an advantage because they've talked to other agents who never even mentioned it. And so now all of a sudden they're like, they recognize that you are by the book.
For the newer agents, if you're not well versed on this, you need to practice that. Pull either your manager or one of the more experienced and say, can I practice? But read it first, obviously, and then practice on how to explain this to someone, because you're going to find yourself in a situation where a buyer will have a lot of questions about that. And you need to be able to answer those questions, because otherwise it's coming across as just something that they need to sign and they don't hear, your reasoning for it. Buyer agency got established in the first place is because back in the days before buyer agency, they all worked for the seller, ultimately.
It was all
period.
seller agency.
It was just a seller. There was no such thing as buyer. Right, there was no such thing as a buyer agency. And in order to protect the buyer more and give them their own individual representation, buyer agency laws got established.
People who really get scared by it and don't want the 5-page exclusive right to represent, isn't that why we originally had the Understanding Who Real Estate Agents Represent form created? I keep those, and where it basically just says that you're representing buyer, seller, da-da-da-da-da. So if it's somebody who gets scared off, that's the form they sign that day, just so that it's done, and then we enter into the exclusive the next time.
Well, what that form really says is it explains agency. Right. But we did this based on what Maryland had already had in place for years about that. This is the form that you then use, and what that means is if you ever find yourself in a situation, the board comes after you, you can take out the form and say, I explained agency to them. And
if
they
they're not
either
willing to
sign it or
sign,
you sign it and say they refused to sign it.
Right.
And you fill in their name, but
Right.
that protects you.
So I use that a lot.
Yeah.
A lot.
You should always have that.